大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 有一个女人，她出生在一个被占领的国家，她没有钱，她没有地位，她甚至没有平等接受教育的权利，但她最终拿下了2座诺贝尔奖，而且是在2个不同的科学领域。这件事在人类历史上只发生过一次，那个人就是玛丽·居里。今天我们要讲的这位女性，她的一生像一部超越时代的电影，有贫穷，有流亡，有爱情，有背叛，有实验室里日以继夜的坚持，有全世界的赞美，也有全世界的谩骂，但她从未停下脚步。让我们回到1867年的华沙，那是一个寒冷的11月，波兰正被俄罗斯帝国统治。在这片失去自由的土地上，一个小女孩诞生了，她的名字叫玛利亚·斯克沃多夫斯卡，也就是后来世界熟知的玛丽·居里。她的父亲是一位中学物理教师，母亲则是一所私立学校的校长。这个家庭深爱知识，也深爱波兰，但那个时代的波兰是悲剧的。俄罗斯殖民统治者禁止波兰语教学，禁止波兰文化表达，连爱国主义都是危险的罪行。玛利亚从小就看见了这种压迫，她也从小就感受到了科学的魅力。父亲书房里摆放着各种实验器材，那些玻璃管，那些温度计，那些让光折射的小仪器，对年幼的玛利亚来说像是魔法。她总是驻足其前，久久不离去，但命运很快就开始考验她。她10岁那年，母亲因为肺结核去世了。2年后，她最爱的姐姐也因为伤寒离开人世。接二连三的丧失，让这个小女孩早早就学会了与悲伤共存，也让她在心底种下了一个信念：唯有知识才能对抗无常。玛利亚在学校的成绩永远是第1名，她的记忆力超强，学习速度惊人，老师们都说这孩子不得了。但那个时代的波兰不允许女性上大学，更不用说俄罗斯统治下的华沙。女性的命运就是结婚生子，知识只是装饰品。但玛利亚拒绝接受这个命运，她和姐姐波洛尼亚想出了一个计划，一个充满情谊的姐妹协议。她们2个都想接受高等教育，但家里的钱只够1个人去，于是她们说好了，先让波洛尼亚去巴黎念医学，玛利亚留下来工作赚钱，等波洛尼亚毕业找到工作之后，再反过来资助玛利亚去巴黎求学。就这样，17岁的玛利亚开始了漫长的等待。她去有钱人家当家庭教师，赚来的钱一部分寄给姐姐，一部分存起来准备自己的未来。她在乡下的庄园里工作，夜晚在油灯下自学数学和物理，有时候整个冬天都待在荒僻的地方，没有朋友，没有娱乐，只有书和她自己的思考。这段岁月很漫长，也很孤独。她甚至曾经爱上了雇主的儿子，2个年轻人相互倾慕，但对方的父母嫌弃她出身贫寒，最终这段感情无疾而终。玛利亚在日记里写下了她的伤心，但她没有沉沦其中太久，她知道自己的路在别的地方。1891年，24岁的玛利亚终于等到了机会，姐姐波洛尼亚已经在巴黎立足。她写信邀请妹妹来，玛利亚带着所有积蓄，坐上了前往法国的火车。她把名字改成了法文的玛丽，开始了人生的新篇章。巴黎的索邦大学，那是当时欧洲最顶尖的学府之一。玛丽报名了物理系，她是班上极少数的女学生之一，周围的男同学用怀疑的眼光看着她，教授们也不确定该如何对待她，但玛丽根本不在乎，她只在乎学习。她住在巴黎拉丁区的一间阁楼，冬天冷得要命，有时候连暖炉都买不起。她靠面包和巧克力为生，为了省钱连公车都不坐，走路上学来回好几公里。但她说她从来没有觉得悲惨，因为她终于可以尽情地学习了。就在这个时期，她遇见了一个改变她一生的人，那个人叫皮埃尔·居里。他是一位才华横溢的法国物理学家，研究磁性现象已经颇有成就。2个人因为共同的研究兴趣相识， 很快就发现彼此的灵魂频率完全一致。他们一起讨论科学，一起思考宇宙的奥秘。爱情在学术的土壤里悄悄生根。1895年，玛丽和皮埃尔结婚了。这对夫妻拒绝了教堂婚礼，选择了一个简单的民事典礼，连婚纱都没有。玛丽穿着一件深蓝色的裙子，她说这件裙子可以继续穿进实验室工作。这就是他们两个人的浪漫方式。婚后的生活依然清贫，但充实无比。他们在一个破旧的棚屋里做实验，夏天酷热，冬天透寒，烟雾弥漫，条件糟糕到极点。但玛丽说那是她一生中最快乐的岁月之一，因为她和最爱的人一起追求最爱的真理。1897年，他们的大女儿伊蕾娜出生了。这个孩子后来也拿下了诺贝尔化学奖，真的是名副其实的诺贝尔家族。也是在这一年，玛丽开始了她最重要的研究。她的博士论文题目让她找到了一扇新的大门。那个时代刚刚发现了一种奇特的现象。1896年，法国物理学家贝克勒尔发现了铀会自然发出射线，这个现象让科学界震惊了。玛丽决定深入研究这个现象，她把它命名为放射性，这个词是她发明的。她开始系统性地测量各种元素的放射性。她发现铀矿石的放射性远远超过纯铀本身，这说明矿石中一定还有其他的放射性元素，一个更强大的未知物质藏在其中。丈夫皮埃尔听了之后立刻放下自己的研究，加入了他的实验。他们花了好几年的时间，处理了几吨重的沥青铀矿渣，在粗陋的棚屋里不断提炼，不断蒸馏，手都被腐蚀性化学物质灼伤了，呼吸着有毒的蒸汽，但他们乐此不疲。1898年7月，他们宣布发现了第一个新元素，玛丽把它命名为钋 （polonium）， 为了纪念她那被占领的祖国波兰 （Poland）。这个命名充满了她对故土的深情。同年12月，他们又宣布发现了第二个新元素镭 （radium）。这个元素的放射性比铀强了几百万倍，它还会发出美丽的蓝绿色光芒，在黑暗中闪烁着神秘的光。玛丽曾说那是世界上最美丽的东西，她不知道那道光也是夺命的毒。1903年，玛丽·居里完成了博士论文答辩，她成为了法国第一位获得物理学博士学位的女性。同年，她和皮埃尔以及贝克勒尔共同获得了诺贝尔物理学奖。因为他们在放射性研究上的开创性贡献，玛丽成为了历史上第一位获得诺贝尔奖的女性。全世界的目光都投向了这对法国夫妇，记者蜂拥而至，鲜花和赞美如潮水般涌来。但他们两个都是不喜欢曝光的科学人。皮埃尔甚至说得了奖之后反而没办法好好做研究了。就在他们的生命最辉煌的时刻，命运却给了一记残忍的重击。196年4月19日，皮埃尔·居里在巴黎街头被一辆马车斩过，当场死亡。那时候他才47岁。玛丽崩溃了，那个曾经与他并肩研究的爱人，那个懂得他所有想法的灵魂伴侣，就这样骤然消失了。他的日记在那段时间几乎无法阅读，字迹凌乱，充满了无法言说的悲痛。他写道：没有他我不知道怎么活下去，但他还是活下去了，而且活得更加顽强。他接下了皮埃尔在巴黎大学的教授职位，成为了索邦大学历史上第一位女教授。第一堂课的教室挤满了听众，不只是学生，还有记者和社会名流，都想亲眼见见这位传奇女性。玛丽走进教室，不发一语，直接从皮埃尔最后一堂课讲到的地方继续往下讲。全场鸦雀无声，然后爆出一阵热烈的掌声。但命运没有就此平静，玛丽的生命里即将迎来一场更大的风暴。丧夫后的几年里，玛丽和一位物理学家产生了感情，那个人叫保罗·朗之万，他是皮埃尔的学生，是一位才华出众的科学家，但是他有婚姻，他有太太。这段关系被媒体揭露之后，法国社会爆发了，报纸上充斥着谩骂， 说他是外国荡妇，说他是家庭破坏者。有人在他的公寓外面示威，有人朝他家丢石头，甚至有人公开叫他滚回波兰去。就在丑闻最沸腾的时刻，1911年，诺贝尔委员会宣布，玛丽·居里再度获奖，这次是诺贝尔化学奖。因为成功分离出纯镁元素，她成为了历史上第一个2度获得诺贝尔奖的人，也是唯一一个在2个不同科学领域获奖的人。这个记录到今天都还没有人打破。但就在颁奖前夕，诺贝尔委员会有人写信给她，希望她不要出席典礼，理由是私人丑闻让她的出席不恰当。玛丽回信了，她说她的科学成就和她的私生活是2回事，她的研究是她的研究，她将亲自出席斯德哥尔摩。她去了，昂首挺胸的去了，亲手接下了她的第2座诺贝尔奖。这个时代的女性有多少人敢这样做？这个时代的女性有多少人能承受这样的压力？玛丽·居里做到了。第1次世界大战爆发之后，玛丽没有躲在实验室里，她把镁的研究暂时搁置，投入了另一场战争。她设计了一种移动式 X 光车，把 X 光机装在卡车上，开到前线去为受伤的士兵进行检查，找出弹片位置，救了无数的生命。法国人叫那些卡车为小居里。她自己学会了开车，学会了基本的维修，也训练了150多位女性技师，在炮火连天的战场附近工作。她说能够救人的科学才是真正有意义的科学。战后，她继续领导她的镁研究所，继续训练下一代的科学家。她的实验室成为了欧洲最重要的放射性研究中心之一，各国的科学家纷纷前来学习。她也积极参与国际学术合作，推动科学知识的共享。但岁月和辐射正在悄悄侵蚀她的身体。那些年她长期暴露在大量辐射之中，那个年代的人还不知道放射线的危险。她的试管里装着镁和钋，有时候甚至放在口袋里。她的研究笔记本至今仍然带有强烈辐射，被保存在铅制容器中。任何想要查阅的人必须先签署免责声明。她的视力越来越差，白内障让她几乎失明。她的手指因为辐射灼伤布满了伤痕。她的血液开始出现问题，骨髓受损，造血功能下降。但她依然工作，依然研究，依然出现在实验室里。她的学生说她是那种永远不会停下来的人。1934年，66岁的玛丽·居里因为再生障碍性贫血去世。那是一种因为长期接触高剂量辐射所引发的血液疾病。她用自己的生命换来了人类对放射性的认识。她去世的时候几乎没有遗产，她把研究成果都公开了，没有申请专利，没有把知识变成财富。她相信科学应该属于全人类，而不是少数人的私有财产。她的女儿伊蕾娜继承了她的志业，后来也和丈夫一起发现了人工放射性，在1935年拿下了诺贝尔化学奖。这个家庭在科学史上留下了独一无二的印记。玛丽·居里的故事告诉我们什么？她告诉我们，伟大的成就从来不是从天而降的，它是在无数个孤独的夜晚慢慢积累的，是在冷得透骨的实验室里一点一滴磨出来的，是在所有人都说你不行的时候还继续做下去换来的。她是一个移民，一个贫穷的人，一个女人。在那个时代，这3个身份叠加在一起，几乎是一道无法翻越的墙。但她翻过去了。她不是天才，她是努力到让人觉得是天才的那种人。她说，我不害怕人生中的风暴，因为我正在学习如何航行。她把放射性这个概念带进了人类的文明。她发现的钋和镁开启了核子物理的新纪元。她的 X 光车在战场上拯救了生命。她开创的放射治疗技术至今仍然是癌症治疗的重要工具。每一年有多少病患因为她的研究而得以延长生命？那个数字是无法计算的。她也改变了世界对女性的看法。当时的人说女人不适合做科学，说女人的大脑不适合逻辑思考，说女人在实验室里是一种危险。 她用2座诺贝尔奖回答了所有这些偏见。1995年，她的遗体被迁入巴黎的先贤祠，那是法国最神圣的殿堂，专门安葬对法国和人类文明有卓越贡献的人物。她是第一位以自身成就被安葬在那里的女性。和伏尔泰、和卢梭、和雨果并肩长眠，她从一个波兰的穷女孩走到了人类文明最光荣的殿堂。她走了整整一生，但每一步都走得那么扎实。今天的节目到这里，玛丽、居里的故事让你有什么感想？欢迎在留言区告诉 Jenny。我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. There was a woman. She was born in a country that had been conquered and occupied. She had no money. She had no social standing. She did not even have the right to receive an equal education. And yet she went on to win 2 Nobel Prizes. 2 prizes in 2 completely different fields of science. That had never happened before in all of human history. That woman was Marie Curie. The story we are telling today is about a woman whose life reads like a film that was made a century too early. There was poverty. There was exile. There was love. There was betrayal. There were years of stubborn, relentless work in a laboratory. There was the praise of the entire world. And there was the furious condemnation of the entire world too. But she never once stopped moving forward. Let us go back to Warsaw in November of 1867. Poland was under the control of the Russian Empire. On that cold and gray piece of occupied land, a little girl was born. Her name was Maria Sklodowska. The world would later know her as Marie Curie. Her father was a physics teacher at a secondary school. Her mother was the principal of a private school. This was a family that deeply loved knowledge and deeply loved Poland. But the Poland of that era was a tragic place. Russian colonial rulers had banned the teaching of the Polish language. They had banned the expression of Polish culture. Even patriotism was treated as a dangerous crime. Young Maria grew up watching this oppression unfold around her. She also grew up feeling the magnetic pull of science. Her father kept all kinds of scientific instruments in his study. Glass tubes, thermometers, small devices that bent light and made the world look different. To the young Maria, these things felt like magic. She would stand in front of them for a long time, completely absorbed. But fate began testing her very early in life. When Maria was 10 years old, her mother died of tuberculosis. Just 2 years later, her beloved older sister died of typhoid fever. These losses arrived one after another. They taught this young girl to live alongside grief. They also planted a belief deep inside her heart. Only knowledge can stand firm against the randomness of life. Maria was always at the top of her class at school. Her memory was extraordinary. She learned at a breathtaking speed. Her teachers all said this child was something special. But the Poland of that time did not allow women to attend university. Under Russian rule in Warsaw, the destiny of a woman was marriage and children. Education was considered an ornament, not a right. Maria refused to accept that destiny. She and her older sister Bronia came up with a plan. It was a pact built entirely on love between sisters. They both wanted higher education, but the family could only afford to send one of them. So they made an agreement. Bronia would go to Paris to study medicine first. Maria would stay behind and work to earn money. She would send part of her earnings to support her sister. Once Bronia graduated and found a job, she would then support Maria in return so that Maria could go to Paris and study. And so the wait began. 17-year-old Maria started working as a governess for wealthy families. Part of what she earned she sent to her sister. Part of it she saved for her own future. She worked on remote country estates far from the city. At night she studied mathematics and physics by lamplight. Sometimes she spent entire winters in isolated places. No friends. No entertainment. Just books and her own thoughts. Those years were long and lonely. She even fell in love with the son of one of her employers. The 2 young people were drawn to each other. But his parents looked down on her because of her poverty. The relationship came to nothing. Maria wrote about her heartbreak in her journal. But she did not let it pull her under for long. She knew her path lay somewhere else entirely. In 1891, 24-year-old Maria finally received the opportunity she had been waiting for. Her sister Bronia had established herself in Paris. She wrote and invited Maria to come. Maria packed everything she owned and boarded a train bound for France. She changed her name to the French version, Marie. And a new chapter of her life began. The Sorbonne in Paris was one of the finest universities in Europe at that time. Marie enrolled in the physics department. She was one of only a tiny number of women in her class. The male students around her looked at her with skepticism. The professors were not quite sure how to treat her. But Marie did not care about any of that. She cared only about learning. She lived in a small attic room in the Latin Quarter of Paris. In winter it was bitterly cold. Sometimes she could not afford to heat the place at all. She survived on bread and chocolate. To save money she walked several kilometers to and from school every day rather than taking the bus. But she later said she never once felt miserable. Because for the first time in her life, she could learn as much as she wanted. It was during this period that she met the person who would change her life forever. His name was Marie Curie. He was a brilliant French physicist who had already made a name for himself studying magnetic phenomena. The two of them met because of overlapping research interests. They quickly discovered that their minds worked in exactly the same way. They talked about science together. They thought about the mysteries of the universe together. Love grew quietly in the soil of their shared intellectual life. In 1895, Marie and Pierre were married. This couple wanted no church ceremony. They chose a simple civil ceremony with almost nothing by way of celebration. Marie did not even wear a wedding dress. She wore a dark blue outfit. She said it was practical enough to keep wearing into the laboratory afterward. That was their idea of romance. Their life together remained modest in material terms but was rich in every other way. They did their experiments in a leaking, rundown shed. Hot in summer. Freezing in winter. Filled with fumes. The conditions were terrible by any standard. But Marie said those were among the happiest years of her life. Because she was pursuing the truth she loved alongside the person she loved most. In 1897, their first daughter Irene was born. That child would go on to win the Nobel Prize in chemistry herself. Truly a Nobel family in every sense of the phrase. That same year, Marie began the research that would define her entire legacy. Searching for a topic for her doctoral thesis, she found herself drawn to a puzzling new phenomenon. In 1896, the French physicist Henri Becquerel had discovered that uranium spontaneously emitted rays. The scientific world had been astonished. Marie decided to investigate this phenomenon in depth. She coined the term radioactivity to describe it. That word was her invention. She began systematically measuring the radioactivity of various elements and compounds. She discovered that uranium ore was far more radioactive than pure uranium on its own. This meant there had to be other radioactive elements hidden inside the ore. Something more powerful and entirely unknown was lurking there. When Pierre heard this reasoning, he immediately set aside his own work and joined her investigation. They spent years processing tons and tons of pitchblende ore, working in their crude shed, boiling, filtering, and refining over and over. Their hands were burned by corrosive chemicals. They breathed toxic vapors day after day. But they were completely absorbed in what they were doing. In July of 1898, they announced the discovery of a new element. Marie named it polonium. She chose that name in honor of her occupied homeland Poland. The naming carried all the longing she felt for the country that had raised her. In December of the same year, they announced a second discovery. Radium. This element was millions of times more radioactive than uranium. It also emitted a beautiful blue-green glow, shimmering mysteriously in the dark. Marie once said it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She did not yet know that the glow was also lethal. In 1903, Marie Curie successfully defended her doctoral thesis. She became the first woman in France to earn a doctorate in physics. That same year, she and Pierre, along with Becquerel, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. The recognition came for their groundbreaking contributions to the study of radioactivity. Marie became the first woman in history to receive a Nobel Prize. The eyes of the world turned toward this remarkable French couple. Journalists descended on them. Flowers and praise arrived in waves. But both of them were scientists who shrank from the spotlight. Pierre even complained that winning the prize had made it harder to focus on actual research. And then, at the very moment their lives seemed to be at their most brilliant, fate delivered a devastating blow. On April 19, 1906, Pierre Curie was crossing a street in Paris. A horse-drawn wagon struck him. He died instantly. He was only 47 years old. Marie was shattered. The partner who had stood beside her through every experiment. The companion who understood every thought she had. He was gone in an instant. Her journal entries from that period are almost painful to read. The handwriting is erratic. The words are filled with a grief that goes beyond description. She wrote that she did not know how to continue living without him. But she did continue. And she continued with even greater determination than before. She took over Pierre's professorship at the University of Paris. She became the first female professor in the history of the Sorbonne. The lecture hall was packed for her first class. Not just with students but with journalists and society figures who had come to witness this historic moment. Marie walked in. She said nothing about what had just happened. She simply picked up exactly where Pierre had left off in his last lecture. The room fell completely silent. Then it erupted in applause. But life was not about to become peaceful. A larger storm was already gathering. In the years after Pierre died, Marie developed a close relationship with a physicist named Paul Langevin. He had been one of Pierre's students. He was a brilliant scientist in his own right. But he was married. When this relationship was exposed by the press, French society exploded. The newspapers ran vicious stories calling her a foreign homewrecker. People demonstrated outside her apartment building. Rocks were thrown at her windows. Some voices publicly told her to go back to Poland. And right in the middle of this roaring scandal, in 1911, the Nobel Committee made an announcement. Marie Curie had been awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. This time for successfully isolating pure radium. She became the first person in history to win 2 Nobel Prizes. She remains to this day the only person to have won Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields. That record has never been broken. But on the eve of the award ceremony, she received a letter from a member of the Nobel Committee. The letter suggested it might be better if she did not attend. The reasoning was that the ongoing personal scandal made her presence awkward. Marie wrote back. She said her scientific achievements and her private life were entirely separate matters. Her research belonged to her research. She would be coming to Stockholm in person. And she went. Head high. She walked to the podium and accepted her second Nobel Prize herself. How many women of that era would have dared to do the same? How many could have withstood that kind of pressure? Marie Curie did both. When the First World War broke out, Marie did not retreat into her laboratory. She set aside her radium research and turned her attention to a different kind of urgency. She designed a mobile X-ray unit. She had X-ray machines installed in vehicles and driven to the front lines. There, wounded soldiers could be examined to locate shrapnel and bullet fragments inside their bodies. Countless lives were saved. The French soldiers called these vehicles petites curies, meaning little curies. Marie learned to drive. She learned basic vehicle maintenance. She also trained more than 150 female technicians to operate these mobile units near active battlefields. She said that science which could save lives was the only science worth doing. After the war, she returned to leading her Radium Institute. She continued training the next generation of scientists. Her laboratory became one of the most important centers for radioactivity research in all of Europe. Scientists came from many countries to learn there. She also worked actively to promote international scientific collaboration and the sharing of knowledge. But the years and the radiation were quietly wearing away at her body. She had spent decades exposed to enormous doses of radioactivity. The scientific world of that era did not yet understand the danger. She carried test tubes filled with radium and polonium around with her. Sometimes she kept them in her coat pocket. Her research notebooks to this day are so contaminated with radiation that they are stored in lead-lined containers. Anyone wishing to consult them must sign a disclaimer first. Her eyesight deteriorated severely. Cataracts nearly left her blind. Her fingers bore the scars of radiation burns across their surface. Her blood began to show serious abnormalities. Her bone marrow was damaged. Her ability to produce healthy blood cells broke down. But she kept working. She kept researching. She kept showing up at the laboratory. Her students said she was the kind of person who simply could not stop. In 1934, at the age of 66, Marie Curie died. The cause was aplastic anemia. It is a disease of the blood caused by prolonged exposure to high doses of radiation. She gave her life in exchange for humanity's understanding of radioactivity. When she died, she had almost no personal wealth. She had made all of her research findings public. She had never applied for patents. She had never turned knowledge into personal fortune. She believed that science belonged to all of humanity, not to a privileged few. Her daughter Irene carried on the work. Irene and her husband later discovered artificial radioactivity and won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1935. This family left a mark on the history of science that is truly without equal. What does the story of Marie Curie teach us? It teaches us that great achievements never fall from the sky. They are built up slowly across countless solitary nights. They are ground out drop by drop in laboratories that are freezing cold. They are earned by continuing to work when everyone around you says it cannot be done. She was an immigrant. She was poor. She was a woman. In the era she lived in, those three facts stacked together formed a wall that almost no one could climb over. She climbed over it anyway. She was not simply a genius. She was someone who worked so hard that the world decided she must be a genius. She once said she was not afraid of the storms in her life because she was learning how to sail. She brought the concept of radioactivity into human civilization. The elements polonium and radium that she discovered opened the door to a new era in nuclear physics. Her mobile X-ray units saved lives on the battlefield. The radiation therapy techniques she pioneered remain a vital tool in the treatment of cancer to this day. How many patients each year have had their lives extended because of her research? That number is impossible to calculate. She also changed the way the world thought about women. People of her time said women were unsuited to science. They said female minds were incapable of logical thinking. They said women were a danger in a laboratory. She answered all of those prejudices with 2 Nobel Prizes. In 1995, her remains were transferred to the Pantheon in Paris. That is the most sacred memorial in France. It is reserved for those who have made extraordinary contributions to France and to human civilization. She was the first woman to be interred there on the basis of her own achievements. She rests there alongside Voltaire, alongside Rousseau, alongside Victor Hugo. She began as a poor girl from Poland. She ended up in the most honored hall in human memory. She walked that entire distance in one lifetime. And every single step was solid ground. See you next time.